Well, I'm just going to begin by asking why Kurt Cobain and why now?
I don't have a good answer for you about why now. I mean, this was supposed to have happened in 2007. So why now is when things happen for a reason, and that's is when it happened. I don't think we should make too much of it culturally. Like, well, 20 years now we're ready for it. I mean, I think this film could have happened 10 years ago and it would have been fine. Why Kurt Cobain? I'm interested in creating immersive cinema. I'm not interested in trad documentary. I think there's plenty of room for that and other people can do it. I don't use documentary as a formal tool of history. I think books are better used as for historical purposes because they're big and you can get a lot of stuff in there. A movie, man, is like, you break it down, it's 30 pages. That's called Cliff Notes to history. So I'm always looking for the canvas that affords me an opportunity to create these sort of immersive experiences where the films sort of become the not so much about the subject, but they become the personification of the subject. I'm interested in the cinematic adaptation of this specific subject, and whether I'm doing Kurt Cobain or the Rolling Stones or Bob Evans, that is my focus. I want to do what is uniquely cinematic in regards to this subject. If I was writing a book, I'm going to approach it differently. With Kurt, so with Kurt, I happen to have an artist who worked in just about every medium there is. Photography, Super 8 film, sculpting, painting, drawing, music, sound collage, everything. Okay? And that all artists leave behind a sort of autobiography of their life. Our experiences are embedded in our work. So with Kurt Cobain, we have an artist who created one of the most complete visual and oral autobiographies. And that was an opportunity to do something that I hadn't seen before, which was to tell the story of his sort of interior journey through life in a documentary. Documentaries generally are about the external world, not the interior world. But Kurt was so expressive in his art that one of his great gifts was his ability to externalize his interior space through his art. And so this was this incredible opportunity to do this film about an artist. And if Kurt was named Bob Smith, some anonymous kid from the Midwest, I would have approached the film in a similar manner, and I would have been equally as invested and interested in it. As I saw this, at a certain point, it wasn't Kurt Cobain, it was this boy named Kurt, who was Wendy's son and Don's son and Kim's brother, Francis's father and Courtney's husband and Chris's friend. That was this guy, Kurt,
So when dealing with someone so iconic, so revered as Kurt is it just very crucial for you to find the human within him to be able to connect to this story?
Well, it's critical in any movie that you find that, for me at least, that I find the universal, that I find that thing which transcends the vocation, that thing that is relatable to you or to I. And with Kurt, I found a family origin story that was incredibly relatable, that deals with issues we all deal with. Every person, with our parents and our children, and the pursuit of acceptance and finding your place. And so I felt that there were these themes that were so connective and so relatable, and given the backdrop, epic. It's this very intimate story set against an epic backdrop, and that's kind of how I played it.
And were you a big fan of Nirvana back in the mid-90s, early 90s?
I would not say I was a big fan, no. I was a much bigger fan of the Meat Puppets and Husker Du and Black Flag. But I had seen Nirvana play, and Kurt and I are the same age, and Nirvana had a tremendous impact, obviously, on the culture at a very important moment in my life.
And was there anything in particular during the making of this that really kind of blew you away? Any new information?
Yeah, I mean, there were some things that were sort of superficial, like discovering Kurt's version of the Beatles, and I love her. I mean, that was like fuck, on so many levels. One of which is he's doing a Paul McCartney song. But you know, my epiphany of today is that Kurt might have been a little more like. Before I made this film, I would have thought he would be anyone in the Beatles but Paul. I would have thought, he's more John or George or Ringo. In fact, Kurt used to say, there was an interview I had with Kurt where he talked about how he didn't want to be, when he was little, he wanted to be in the Beatles, but he didn't want to be a front man. He wanted to be the drummer. Yeah. The last guy I would have thought going into this movie that Kurt would have been in the Beatles was Paul. But now that I've made the film, actually, I think it's probably, there's a lot more of Paul in Kurt. And I'm referring to the romanticism than I had known prior to this. That was one of the revelations for me, was how into the idea of love he was. And also going back to your question, of course, the audio that I unearthed of him describing these traumatic events when he was 14 in the form of spoken word fiction. And I'm referring to a moment in the film where Kurt talks about trying to kill himself when he was 14 because of a situation where he felt embarrassed. And that was, I think, probably the most important find.
Because, I mean, Kurt, on several occasions, has always sort of spoken about not liking media spotlight. He wanted some privacy. He wanted to kind of escape, it seemed.
That's why he sat for a 25-hour interview with Michael Azarette.
All right, well, no, I'm sure that he...
Listen, Kurt spoke out of both sides of his mouth.
Yeah.
So if we're going to talk about things Kurt said in interviews, let's look at that a bit objectively and know that there's a lot of things at play. This was not Bob Dylan. Kurt was very public. In fact, one of his problems was he was possibly too public, And when you compare what Kurt experienced, and this is pre-internet still, when you compare the way Kurt experienced fame, and you compare that to someone like Bob Dylan, who never revealed anything, he revealed very little about himself. I would say that Dylan was a private person. I would say that Kurt wanted it both ways. That's just my opinion. But I think that there's this sentiment, though. It's one thing to say, I'm a private person, fuck off. Well, then if that's true, don't do interviews. And certainly don't allow your wife to do a Vanity Fair interview when you have nothing to promote. Don't invite the media into your space. And you certainly don't sit down for a 25-hour tell-all. That's just... I mean, I couldn't sit and tell you my life story for more than 5 hours when I was 25.
Because, I mean, you do seem very concerned with showing, obviously, a very honest, real depiction of Kurt Cobain. And this doesn't just eulogise over him, or this doesn't shy away from showing his flaws. I mean, how vital is it for you that this remains that way, that this...
I mean, we're not talking about rock and roll fantasy. Like, that's what Kurt destroyed. Kurt destroyed, he was... The reason Kurt was such a breath of fresh air is he came at it, and Nirvana came at it with a level of integrity and honesty that had been missing from mainstream rock and roll. And so for me, if you're making a film about Kurt Cobain and you're trying to create the Kurt Cobain experience, that film should be honest. And the idea of repurposing the myth was not something that either Francis or I were interested in.
Of course, I mean, there's a host of quite incredible kind of talking head interviews, from ex-girlfriends to parents to ex-wife. And I'm just wondering, obviously Dave Grohl is the notable absence from this. I was just wondering...
I thought it was Chad. I thought Chad was the notable absent.
But Dave Grohl isn't in the movie at all. I was just wondering why that
Chad was the drummer for the first couple of years.
Oh, I meant in terms of interviews.
Yeah, Dave was. It's not. There were 10 people who played in Nirvana, and I'm not trying to be flippant here. I understand that Dave Grohl's Dave Grohl, right? But I didn't need more than one person to represent Kurt's interests in Nirvana. This wasn't intended to be a talking head film. I wanted as little talking head as possible, and I wanted as few participants as possible. the bare minimum needed so that we can maintain a greater degree of intimacy with those people. And the 5 people that are on screen, I believe, were the 5 people who were closest to Kurt Cobain in his lifetime. Dave, I reached out to for an interview, and he wasn't available because he was recording his album, and I was good with that. I was like, okay, I can. That's not going to hinder me from achieving what I'm trying to achieve with this film. And then eventually, Dave was finished his album and called up and was available to do an interview, and it was after we had locked picture. We were racing to get the film to the premiere. So I said, okay, we'll try to do the interview, but it's very doubtful I'm going to be able to properly integrate it into a movie I've been working on for years and spent months and months and months editing to get it to where it is. You know, when I did the interview with Dave, and it was great, and I would have loved to have done it 6 months earlier.
And just finally, very quickly, are there any other musicians that fascinate you enough that you feel one day you could explore their life in another documentary?
You know, the thing is, like, a lot of people who make great art don't necessarily have great, that just because you're a great artist doesn't mean there's a great story. You know what I mean? Like, Amy Winehouse is a great artist. Is it a great story? We'll find out. But, you know, I think that the challenge is finding like someone like Bob Evans, right? Great subject because his life is his art in a way, you know? So it's hard to find those things. So, but here's the direct answer to your question. Led Zeppelin, you know, that to me is the one great music doc. But there's plenty of great music docs that are about to come out, you know. But that's one that I've wanted to see someone make. But you know what my favorite music doc is? Rock and Roll, Filth of the Fury.
I've never seen that.
Oh my God, that is such an awesome movie. And if you saw Montage of Heck and you saw Filth and the Fury, you might recognize that it's Julian's approach to the subject in that film is exactly what I love. He brings the subject to life, and you're not reporting on it from the outside. You're kind of there in it, and the movie is almost like itself an extended member of the band. And I love that, you know, because, like, man, when people do these, like, by the numbers music docs, it doesn't make sense. It's like, you know, music shouldn't be sort of cold history. And yes, there will be some movies where you have to have that scene where the person's listening to the radio for the first time, but not every movie has to have that scene.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey, you guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yeah.
Nice.
Hey,